I always thought Raccoon City was ordinary. A working-class town where people clocked in, clocked out, and spent weekends watching ball games or drinking cheap beer at local bars. The kind of place where you could walk down Main Street at 3 in the morning and still hear the buzz of neon signs, the hum of vending machines, the occasional rattle of a passing bus. But lately, something had changed. It was subtle at first. The kind of thing you'd miss unless you'd lived there long enough to recognize the rhythm of the city. The silences grew longer. The pauses between traffic, between voices, between breaths, stretched. The spaces between sounds started to feel louder than the sounds themselves. I remember one night in particular. The rain had just ended. The streets glistened under pale orange lamps, their reflections broken by potholes and oil stains. The smell of wet asphalt clung to the air. I was walking home from my late shift at the diner. It was the usual route. Past the high school football field, across the cracked parking lot of the old convenience store, down the row of duplexes where porch lights glowed dimly like half-awake eyes. Everything looked familiar, and yet, nothing felt right. I noticed a dog sitting at the corner of 7th and Maple. The first blackout should have been routine. Storms hit Raccoon City all the time. Power lines went down. Lights flickered. Waited an hour, maybe 2, and everything buzzed back to life. But this one felt different. I was sitting in my apartment, the TV playing low, when the screen went black. At first, I thought the cable cut out, but then the hum of the refrigerator stopped. The air conditioner went silent. Even the streetlights outside clicked off one by one, leaving the block swallowed in shadow. The quiet was suffocating. No traffic, no buzz of neon signs, no hum of electronics, just the wind rattling through the alley and something softer. A shuffle, a scrape, like shoes dragging across wet pavement. I lit a candle. The flame flickered against the walls, making the shadows stretch unnaturally. I remember running my hand along the wallpaper, just to ground myself. It felt damp, though the walls weren't wet. Minutes passed, then hours. Still no power. Around midnight, the phone rang. The sound nearly sent me out of my chair. I grabbed the receiver with clammy hands. "Hello?" I whispered. Nothing. Just static. Breathing. And then the line cut. I sat frozen for what felt like hours, the phone still pressed to my ear even after the dial tone vanished. When I finally looked out the window, I saw them. Not one. Not two. Dozens. Figures stumbling in the dark, moving strangely. Not like drunks, not like kids messing around. Their arms twitched, their steps uneven, like marionettes pulled by tangled strings. I couldn't make out their faces, but I could hear them. Low, wet murmurs carried by the wind. I pulled the curtain shut and sat in silence, heart hammering in my chest. When the power finally returned, long after sunrise, I opened the window just a crack. The streets were empty again. No figures. No sound. As if the night had erased itself. But I knew it wasn't gone. Something had shifted. The shadows felt heavier, and the silence never left. A mutt, scruffy and gray. It wasn't unusual to see strays around here, but this one, it wasn't moving. Just staring at the empty street, ears stiff, lips curled back but silent. I slowed my steps. Usually dogs bark, or growl, or run. This one just sat there, breathing heavy, as if waiting for something to come around the bend. The wind shifted, carrying a smell I couldn't place. Not garbage, not sewage. It was sour, chemical, with a faint metallic sting that burned the back of my throat. I coughed into my sleeve and hurried past. That's when I noticed the phone booth. It stood on the corner, glass streaked with rain, the receiver dangling by its cord. The phone rang once, shrill, sharp, echoing through the street. I froze. Then silence. No second ring. No dial tone. Just the faint creak of the booth's door shifting in the wind. By the time I reached my block, my hands were clammy and I couldn't explain why. The houses all looked the same. Curtains drawn, lights flickering from televisions inside. Ordinary. But the quiet lingered, like the city itself was holding its breath. I told myself I was imagining it, that it was just exhaustion, just nerves. But deep down, I knew better. I'd lived in Raccoon City all my life. And that night, for the very first time, I felt like a stranger in my own town. The first time I realized something was wrong with Raccoon City. It wasn't the news, or the sirens, or even the silence. It was the little things. At the diner where I worked, customers stopped showing up for breakfast. Not all at once, not overnight, just fewer and fewer each day. By the end of the week, we'd have whole mornings where only 1 or 2 people came in. And the ones who did weren't normal. One woman sat in a booth for hours without ordering. She just stirred a cup of cold coffee with a spoon, round and round, eyes unfocused. When I asked if she was okay, she blinked like she had forgotten I existed. Then she stood up, left a $5 bill on the counter, and walked out into the rain without saying a word. Another customer came in, a man in a business suit, briefcase in hand. He ordered a burger, but when I brought it to him, he didn't touch the bun or fries. He ripped the patty out with his hands and shoved it into his mouth raw, chewing with blood dripping down his chin. He didn't even flinch, just stared straight ahead, chewing like it was the most natural thing in the world. Nobody else in the diner said a word. Nobody reacted. They just pretended not to see it. That was the part that scared me the most. Later that night, walking home, I passed the small grocery store on 3rd Street. The lights were still on, but the shelves inside were nearly bare. Canned. Food, bottled water, over-the-counter medicine, all gone. I saw a mother tugging her kid by the hand, bags clutched to her chest like she was running from something. When she saw me staring, she lowered her head and pulled him faster. Rumors started circulating the next morning. Missing pets, teachers calling in sick, a whole classroom at the elementary school dismissed early because a boy had fallen ill. Nobody would say what ill meant. The Raccoon City Times printed a small column about unusual illnesses. Something about a new flu strain. But the article disappeared from the next day's paper. No corrections, no follow-up, just gone. That's when I started noticing the stairs. On the subway, a man in a gray coat sat across from me. He didn't blink the whole ride. Didn't look at his phone, didn't shift in his seat. Just watched me. Eyes glassy. His lips moved slightly, like he was whispering something under his breath. I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself I was tired. But when the train screeched to a stop, he stood and walked off without breaking eye contact. And I realized he hadn't been whispering words. He'd just been chewing and chewing. By the second week, the city didn't feel like Raccoon City anymore. It felt hollow. Schools were the first to go. They shut down for safety inspections, but no one ever saw work crews. No construction vans, no inspectors, just locked gates and playgrounds left to rot in silence. The swings creaked in the wind, moving like invisible children were still playing. The stores followed. Yes, the doors were open, but stepping inside was like walking into a graveyard. Shelves stripped bare, shopping carts abandoned in the aisles, half-melted popsicles leaking into sticky puddles, radios behind the counter still playing, but only static, or fragments of commercials repeating like broken records. The library closed overnight. No announcement, no warning. When I peeked inside through the locked glass doors, the desks were overturned, books scattered across the floor. Some pages were torn, others soaked in water. It looked less like a closure and more like people had fled mid-sentence. That was the city now. Every familiar place felt wrong. But worse than the empty spaces were the faces of the people who remained. Neighbors I'd known all my life no longer said hello. They just stared too long, their eyes glassy, smiles faint but frozen. Like they were mimicking human gestures without remembering why. At work, my coworker asked me the same question 3 times in a row. The exact same words, the exact same tone, like a record stuck on repeat. I didn't answer the 3rd time. I just walked away. Even the people who still seemed normal carried something in their expressions. A flicker of recognition, then sudden blankness, as though a curtain dropped behind their eyes. That was when I stopped answering the phone. Stopped opening the door, stopped making eye contact, because in Raccoon City you couldn't trust faces anymore. By then, leaving seemed like the only logical choice. Pack a bag, get in the car, and drive until Raccoon City was nothing but a memory. But the city wouldn't let us. The highways were blocked. Police cruisers sat across every exit ramp, their lights flashing red and blue, but the cars were empty. Doors left open, radios hissing static. Sometimes I swore I saw movement inside them, shadows shifting in the driver's seat. But when I looked closer, there was nothing. The bus routes stopped without warning. People stood at stops for hours, clutching bags, staring down the street as if sheer hope could make the buses appear. They never did. One night I heard helicopters overhead. The sound filled me with relief, until I realized they never made announcements, never dropped supplies, never even turned on searchlights. They just circled, watching. We were trapped. That was when the nights turned unbearable. Screams echoed through the alleys. Not shouts for help. Screams that ripped through the air, cut off too quickly, replaced by wet, tearing sounds I didn't want to understand. Sometimes it was laughter, low, broken laughter that rose suddenly and ended in silence. I started pushing furniture against my door, barricading windows. The shadows outside my apartment didn't move like shadows should. They lingered. They waited. Then one night, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the door. I froze, holding my breath. Then a voice, familiar. My neighbor? He asked if I had candles. For a second, I almost opened it. But something was wrong. His tone was flat. His words too steady, too rehearsed. When I peeked through the chain lock, I saw his hands. Both of them, covered in dried blood. He didn't seem to notice. He just kept asking about candles, over and over. I backed away from the door and didn't answer. The knocking stopped, but I never heard him walk away. That was the moment I understood. There was no way out. Not of the city, not of what it was becoming. Raccoon City was gone. And all that was left was survival. Raccoon City stopped being a city. It became a maze of locked doors, nailed windows, and darkened stairwells. Every apartment was an island. Every family sealed themselves inside, pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. The hallways were silent, but not empty. I'd hear footsteps at odd hours, slow, dragging, circling the building floor by floor. When I peered through the peephole, there was no one there. Only the echo of shoes scraping concrete. Radios still worked. But the voices were wrong. Too cheerful. Too rehearsed. "Good morning, Raccoon City. Another bright day ahead," they said, even as the sky outside was choked gray. Sometimes the broadcast cut mid-sentence, like someone yanked the plug. Sometimes they repeated the same line over and over. I stopped listening. The shadows in the stairwell grew longer, not because of the light, but because they seemed to stretch on their own, bending across the walls like they wanted to crawl inside apartments. One night, I saw one of my neighbors, Mrs. Doyle. She'd lived down the hall for 20 years. I spotted her through the crack in my door. She was walking slowly, clutching her purse against her chest. I whispered her name. She didn't turn, didn't blink. She just kept walking. Her steps didn't echo. She passed my door and continued down the hall, her shadow moving slightly faster than her body. That was when I stopped calling out to people. Even my reflection wasn't safe anymore. I caught it once, moving slower than I did. A fraction off, like a delay in a bad video feed. Its eyes didn't line up with mine. I punched the mirror that night, covered it with a sheet. The world wasn't breaking with explosions or fire. It was breaking with silence, with absence, with erasure. and there was no one left to admit it. The last night I spent in Raccoon City didn't feel like a night at all. It stretched on forever. The sun went down, but the darkness never settled. It was like the city was caught between two moments, trapped in an endless twilight. I tried sleeping, but the noises kept me awake. Not screams, not gunshots, just movement. Dozens of feet shuffling outside. Whispers that seeped through the walls. The voices didn't sound like words anymore, just the rhythm of speech without meaning, like someone practicing being human. Around midnight, the power flickered out for the last time. The fridge clicked silent. The heater died. The red light on the radio went dark. I sat in the cold, listening. That was when the door handle moved, just a twitch, small enough to doubt myself. Then again, harder, turning, rattling, straining against the lock. I backed into the kitchen, clutching a knife I knew wouldn't matter. My eyes fixed on the door, and then it stopped. No footsteps leaving. No sound at all. Just stillness. I thought maybe it was over, until I noticed the shadow under the door. It didn't match the frame. It was taller, wrong, bending into angles no body should make. I pressed myself against the counter, trembling, when a sound broke the silence. Knocking. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The knocks grew faster, more frantic, until it sounded like dozens of fists slamming the door all at once. And then, silence again. I waited for hours, too afraid to move. But when dawn finally came, the light through the window was dim, faded, as if the sun itself had given up on this place. That was the moment I realized. Raccoon City wasn't dying. It was already dead, and something else was wearing its skin. I don't remember deciding to turn the radio back on. It had been dead since the power went out. But on that last morning, a weak hum came through, static, broken by faint voices. At first I thought it was a real broadcast, someone surviving, reaching out. I pressed the speaker against my ear, desperate for words. What I heard wasn't a warning. It wasn't help. It was the same cheery voice from before. Good morning, Raccoon City. Another bright day ahead. Only this time the line didn't loop. It kept going. Don't look outside. Static swallowed the signal. Then another phrase. Don't open your doors. The voice was calm, pleasant, like a weather report. But each instruction twisted my stomach tighter. Don't answer the knocking. The signal grew sharper, louder. I swear I could hear something breathing behind the voice, as if the broadcast wasn't recorded at all, but spoken live, directly into my ear. And then, finally, the last words. You are not supposed to be here. The radio clicked silent. I sat frozen in the dark, staring at the door, at the gray light leaking through the window. If the broadcast was real, who was it talking to? And if it wasn't, then who else was still listening?